Most people think corruption leaves fingerprints. The dangerous kind leaves applause. Winter settled gently over downtown Toronto as thousands of white lights shimmered across the glass towers surrounding the waterfront. Snow drifted through the night air in slow spirals, vanishing beneath the tires of luxury vehicles arriving one after another outside the Grand Hotel, hosting the annual Children's Hope Foundation Charity Gala. For one evening each year, some of the most influential people in Ontario gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to raise money for children facing serious illnesses. Politicians attended. Business leaders attended. Television crews lined the entrance. Every smile seemed polished. Every speech seemed heartfelt. Every camera captured generosity. Inside the ballroom, warmth replaced the cold immediately. Golden light spilled across marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the stage. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with polished wood, expensive perfume, and the comforting aroma of meals being prepared several floors below. Everything felt carefully arranged. Carefully presented. Carefully perfect. Near the entrance stood Officer Daniel Mercer. At 58, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from more than 3 decades of service. Silver had begun to overtake the dark hair at his temples. Deep lines framed his eyes. In 6 months, he would retire. For the first time in many years, Daniel found himself thinking less about investigations and more about peaceful mornings, long walks, and a life that moved a little slower. Beside him sat Coda. The German shepherd remained calm despite the noise surrounding him. His sleek black coat reflected the chandelier light. Guests passed continuously. Coda barely acknowledged any of them. Not the mayor. Not the hospital executives. Not the celebrities posing for photographs. Daniel always admired that quality. Coda never cared about titles. He never cared about wealth. He paid attention to things people overlooked. Across the ballroom stood the centerpiece of the evening. Beneath bright spotlights rested a large transparent raffle drum containing thousands of folded entries. Tonight's grand prize was a luxury lakefront property in Muskoka valued at nearly $3 million. Guests spoke about it constantly. Camera operators filmed it from multiple angles. Volunteers stood nearby answering questions from excited donors. It was impossible to miss. Applause erupted as another major donation was announced from the stage. Daniel glanced toward the crowd. Then something changed. Coda slowly rose to his feet. The movement was subtle enough that nobody else noticed. Daniel did. The dog's ears lifted. His posture tightened slightly. His dark eyes fixed on the raffle display across the room. Daniel followed his gaze. Nothing appeared unusual. Volunteers smiled. Guests laughed. Flashbulbs popped. The raffle drum glittered beneath the lights. Yet Coda continued staring. Motionless. Focused. Daniel felt a familiar sensation settle quietly in the back of his mind. During 7 years together, he had learned a simple lesson. When Coda paid attention to something, there was usually a reason. Around them, the gala continued exactly as planned. Music drifted through the ballroom. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. But Coda never looked away. And for reasons Daniel could not yet explain, the perfect evening suddenly felt a little less perfect. Daniel kept his eyes on Coda for several seconds. The German shepherd did not move. He did not bark. He simply watched the raffle display with the kind of patience that had earned Daniel's trust many times before. Around them, the gala flowed forward like a river of polished conversations and practiced smiles. Nobody noticed the dog. Nobody noticed the small tension quietly settling beneath his stillness. Daniel understood that look. He had seen it in crowded train stations, community events, and once during a search that had led officers to a frightened child hidden beneath a collapsed shed north of Barrie. Coda had never been dramatic. He was not the kind of dog that reacted to every unusual sound or unfamiliar scent. When he focused, there was usually a reason. Daniel exhaled slowly and rested a hand against the side of the dog's neck. The short coat felt warm beneath his fingers. 7 years. That was how long they had worked together. Long enough to develop something that could not be taught inside a training facility. Trust was built differently. It arrived one difficult day at a time. One successful search at a time. One quiet drive home after another. The string quartet shifted into a softer melody. Glasses clinked somewhere near the stage. Snow continued drifting beyond the ballroom windows. For a moment Daniel found himself thinking about a winter many years earlier. Not because he wanted to remember it. Because Coda always seemed to pull old memories to the surface. Back then, Daniel had been investigating a fraud case involving a local community organization. The evidence pointed neatly toward a volunteer coordinator. Every document supported the accusation. Every witness seemed convinced. Daniel had followed the evidence and ignored the uncomfortable feeling that something did not fit. The woman lost her position. Her reputation never fully recovered. 6 months later another investigation revealed the truth. The real architect had been someone else entirely. Someone respected. Someone trusted. Someone hidden behind a carefully maintained image. Daniel still remembered the look in the woman's eyes when she was cleared. Relief mixed with damage that could never be fully repaired. It remained one of the few mistakes that followed him home at night. Since then, he had learned to pay attention when facts and instincts seemed to move in different directions. Beside him, Coda's ears twitched slightly. The dog remained focused on the raffle drum. Daniel followed the line of his gaze again. Volunteers continued greeting donors. Camera crews adjusted equipment. Everything appeared normal. Yet something about the scene felt different now. Not suspicious. Just incomplete. As though a small piece of a puzzle had slipped beneath the table unnoticed. A woman carrying a tray of sparkling water paused nearby and smiled. "Beautiful dog," she said warmly. Daniel returned a polite nod. "Thank you. Thank you." Before either could continue, Coda released a low rumble deep within his chest. It was so quiet that most people would not have heard it. Daniel did. The woman glanced toward the dog and politely excused herself. Daniel's expression tightened. Coda almost never vocalized during public events. Not without cause. On stage, the master of ceremonies stepped beneath the lights once more. Applause rolled across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "the golden ticket drawing will begin shortly." Excitement spread through the crowd. Guests moved closer to the stage. Donors gathered near the display. Cameras turned toward the raffle drum. And for the first time all evening, Coda slowly rose and took a deliberate step forward. Coda moved with quiet purpose through the crowd. He did not pull. He did not rush. His pace remained controlled, measured, almost deliberate. Daniel followed closely, one hand resting lightly on the leash as guests stepped aside to make room. Most people barely noticed them. Their attention remained fixed on the stage where bright lights illuminated the transparent raffle drum. The atmosphere had shifted. Excitement was building. The grand prize drawing was only minutes away. Conversations blended into a steady hum beneath the music. Camera operators adjusted their positions. Volunteers prepared final paperwork near the display. Everything continued exactly as planned. Yet Daniel felt an unexpected tension settling into his chest. Coda stopped near the stairs leading to the stage. His head lifted slightly. His nose worked the air in short, careful breaths. Daniel had seen the behavior many times before. The dog was sorting information. Separating one cent from hundreds. Looking for something that did not belong. A volunteer noticed them and smiled politely. "Everything all right, officer?" Daniel returned the smile. "Probably." It was an honest answer. He was not certain of anything yet. Coda took another step forward. His eyes remained fixed on the raffle drum. Not the crowd. Not the volunteers. Not the photographers. Only the drum. The master of ceremonies stepped back to the microphone. Applause rolled across the ballroom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your generosity tonight. We are about to draw the winner of our golden ticket prize." More guests gathered around the stage. Phones appeared. Cameras lifted. A wave of anticipation swept through the room. Then Coda stopped completely. His body became rigid. Not aggressive. Not fearful. Focused. Daniel looked down at him. The German shepherd's ears remained forward. A low tension settled through his shoulders. Something was wrong. Daniel trusted that much. Near the stage stood Victor Langford, chairman of the foundation. Tall, confident, and impeccably dressed, he greeted donors with easy charm. Beside him stood Margaret Ellis, the foundation's operations director. Calm. Professional. Efficient. Both looked exactly as they should on a night like this. Daniel's attention returned to Coda. The dog suddenly moved closer to the raffle drum. A volunteer hesitated. Sir. Daniel stepped forward and quietly displayed his credentials. I am serving as security liaison for the event. Give me a moment. The volunteer glanced toward Margaret. She approached with a courteous smile. Is there a concern? Daniel chose his words carefully. Nothing specific. My partner is showing unusual interest in the raffle display. Margaret looked surprised but remained composed. You believe there is a security issue? I do not know what I believe yet. Before anyone could respond further, Coda lowered his head and touched his nose against one side of the transparent drum. Not the entire container. One specific section. Then he sat down. Motionless. Staring. Daniel felt a chill unrelated to the winter outside. Years of experience told him the gesture mattered. Coda repeated the behavior. Nose to the same location. Then sitting. Waiting. The same precise sequence twice. The same message. Around them, applause continued. Nobody else understood what they were seeing. Daniel did. He looked toward Margaret and spoke calmly. I am requesting a temporary security pause before the drawing proceeds. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across her face. For several seconds, the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Margaret Ellis maintained her professional smile, but Daniel noticed the careful way she glanced toward the raffle drum before looking back at him. Around them, guests exchanged curious looks. The interruption was small, yet unusual enough to draw attention. Victor Langford stepped forward with effortless composure. Officer Mercer, he said warmly, is there a problem? His voice carried the confidence of a man accustomed to reassuring people. Daniel respected that. He also knew confidence was not evidence. Nothing confirmed, Daniel replied. I am requesting a brief pause while we conduct a routine security review. Victor spread his hands politely. If that helps everyone feel comfortable, by all means. The response was perfect. Almost too perfect. Within minutes, the master of ceremonies explained the delay to the audience. Most guests accepted it with good humor. Others returned to conversations while cameras temporarily stopped rolling. Volunteers carefully moved the raffle drum to a nearby inspection table. Coda remained seated, watching every movement. Daniel noticed that the dog never took his eyes off the same section of the container. Not once. A small team gathered around the display. Event staff. Foundation administrators. A technician responsible for printing and registration systems. Margaret stood nearby with her arms folded. Victor remained calm, speaking quietly with several major donors while they waited. The inspection began. At first, nothing appeared unusual. The transparent drum showed no signs of tampering. The locking mechanism functioned correctly. The folded entries appeared identical. Daniel expected that. Whatever had drawn Coda's attention was unlikely to be obvious. The technician carefully removed a sample of tickets from various areas inside the drum. One by one, they were unfolded and examined beneath bright lights. Names. Numbers. Donation records. Everything appeared legitimate. A volunteer sighed with relief. Another offered a nervous laugh. Looks like your partner gave us a scare. Daniel did not respond. Beside him, Coda remained motionless. The dog had not relaxed. That mattered. 20 minutes. Passed. Then something changed. The technician paused. That is odd. The room became quiet. He held two tickets side by side. To most people they looked identical. Daniel stepped closer. What is it? The technician adjusted his glasses. The paper stock is slightly different. Margaret frowned. Different how? Very slightly. He rubbed the tickets between his fingers. The weight feels almost the same, but not quite. One batch appears marginally thicker. A second technician joined the examination. More samples were pulled from the same area Coda had indicated. The pattern repeated. Tiny differences. Almost impossible to notice without direct comparison. Not enough to prove wrongdoing. Enough to raise questions. Daniel watched Coda. The German shepherd's gaze never shifted. The second technician examined several serial identifiers printed near the fold lines. Suddenly he looked up. Hold on. Everyone turned toward him. These internal batch codes do not match. Silence settled over the table. He separated several entries from the pile. These tickets were supposedly printed during the same registration cycle, but the production identifiers indicate different origins. Margaret's face lost a little color. Victor's expression remained calm, though his smile faded slightly. Daniel felt the old instinct stirring inside him. The feeling that a hidden thread had finally become visible. Not the whole truth. Just the first crack. And sometimes a single crack was enough to bring daylight into a very dark room. The discovery spread through the ballroom faster than the winter wind outside. Conversation softened into whispers. Journalists who had been preparing feel-good coverage suddenly found themselves watching a very different story unfold. The raffle drawing was officially suspended. Guests remained inside, reluctant to leave. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Daniel stood quietly near the inspection table while additional records were brought in for review. Coda sat beside him. Calm. Silent. Watching. The technicians continued comparing registration data against ticket batches. More discrepancies appeared. Not dramatic ones. Small irregularities. Duplicate references. Entries that seemed to arrive through unusual channels. Individually they meant very little. Together they formed a pattern. Shortly after midnight, representatives from the foundation agreed to cooperate with a formal review. Digital records were secured. Access logs were examined. The process moved carefully, professionally, and without public accusations. Daniel preferred it that way. Assumptions had ruined enough lives already. By the following afternoon, investigators identified a troubling connection. Several questionable ticket batches had been approved through administrative channels overseen by Margaret Ellis. The revelation landed heavily. Margaret had worked with the foundation for more than a decade. She was respected throughout the organization. Staff members described her as dependable, organized, and deeply committed to the foundation's mission. Yet the documentation repeatedly pointed toward her office. 2 days later, Margaret sat inside a conference room overlooking a gray Toronto skyline while investigators reviewed the evidence. Snow drifted beyond the windows. The city seemed quieter than usual. She listened without interruption. Her hands remained folded in front of her. Her expression remained composed. When the presentation ended, silence settled over the room. Finally, she lowered her eyes and spoke softly. I accept responsibility. The words spread quickly. News outlets reported that the mystery appeared solved. Commentators discussed damaged trust. Donors expressed disappointment. Foundation officials released statements promising transparency and reform. For most people, the story was over. A culprit had been identified. Accountability had arrived. The public could move on. Daniel should have felt satisfied. Instead, something bothered him. 3 evenings later, he sat alone inside his modest home in Scarborough while snow tapped gently against the windows. Coda rested nearby on the living room rug. A television broadcast summarized the case once again. Margaret's photograph appeared on the screen. Daniel watched quietly. Then he looked toward Coda. The German shepherd lifted his head. For a moment neither moved. Daniel remembered the ballroom. The raffle drum. The first alert. The first inspection. He remembered every detail. Most of all, he remembered where Coda had been looking. Not once had the dog shown interest in Margaret Ellis. Not once. The realization settled heavily inside him. Coda had ignored her completely. Daniel muted the television. The room became silent. Outside, headlights moved across fresh snow. Inside, an old instinct began whispering once more. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. But sometimes a story could become too neat. Too convenient. He looked at Coda and spoke quietly. If she is protecting someone, you already know who it is, do you not? The German shepherd said nothing. He simply held Daniel's gaze. And for the first time since Margaret's confession, Daniel felt certain of one thing. The truth was still missing. The following week brought freezing temperatures and a sky the color of steel over Toronto. Most people had already accepted the official explanation. News coverage faded. Public attention moved elsewhere. The Foundation announced corrective measures. Donors slowly returned. Life continued. Yet Daniel could not let the matter rest. Each morning before reporting for duty, he found himself revisiting the details. Each evening he reviewed reports that no longer officially belonged to him. Retirement was approaching. Logic suggested he should walk away. Experience suggested otherwise. One cold afternoon, Daniel sat inside a small records office reviewing archived Foundation documents that stretched back nearly 10 years. The room smelled faintly of paper, dust, and old coffee. Outside, snow drifted past narrow windows overlooking a crowded street. Coda rested beside the desk, unusually alert despite the quiet surroundings. Daniel studied annual reports, donation summaries, and event records. At first everything appeared ordinary. Then small inconsistencies began emerging. Not crimes. Not evidence. Patterns. Tiny irregularities scattered across multiple years. A donation recorded in one quarter appeared differently in another report. A vendor name changed without explanation. Certain approvals repeatedly passed through identical administrative channels. Individually, each discrepancy seemed harmless. Together, they created an uncomfortable picture. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He had seen this before. The most sophisticated deception rarely depended on a single large lie. It survived through hundreds of small ones. His attention shifted toward a familiar name appearing again and again throughout the records. Victor Langford. Foundation chairman. Public advocate. Community leader. Generous donor. His presence touched nearly every major initiative. Every fundraising expansion. Every strategic partnership. None of that proved anything. In fact, it was exactly what one would expect from a successful chairman. Yet Daniel found himself looking closer. The next day he met with a retired forensic accountant named Harold Benson, a man he trusted from an earlier investigation years ago. They sat together inside a quiet cafe overlooking Lake Ontario. Steam rose from their coffee cups while snow blew across the waterfront outside. Harold reviewed several documents without speaking. Finally he removed his glasses and frowned. This is interesting. Daniel waited. Harold tapped several pages. Someone has been moving small amounts through multiple layers of administration. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to attract auditors. Just enough to disappear. Daniel felt his pulse quicken slightly. Can you identify who? Harold shook his head. Not yet. But whoever designed this understood exactly how oversight works. Later that evening Daniel returned home carrying copies of the reports. Coda greeted him at the door. Before settling beside the kitchen table while Daniel continued reading. Hours passed. Midnight arrived. Then one detail stopped him. A consulting company listed repeatedly over several years shared an address with another organization connected to a charitable partnership. Further research revealed additional links. Separate names. Separate businesses. The same network. Daniel stared at the information in silence. Slowly, a larger shape began forming beneath the surface. He thought back to the gala. To the raffle drum. To the moment Coda first reacted. Most importantly, he remembered where the dog had been looking. Not at Margaret. Never Margaret. Daniel lowered the documents and glanced across the room. Coda was already watching him. The German shepherd's dark eyes reflected the lamplight. Calm. Patient. Certain. Daniel exhaled slowly. You never cared about the woman, did you, partner? Outside, snow brushed softly against the windows. Inside, the first shadow fell across the reputation of the man everyone trusted. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigation widened quietly. No dramatic headlines appeared. No public accusations were made. The people conducting the review understood the importance of certainty. Reputations had already been damaged once. Nobody wanted to repeat that mistake. Outside, winter deepened across Ontario. Snowbanks rose along city streets. Lake winds swept through Toronto's waterfront district. Meanwhile, a small team of financial specialists worked through years of records connected to the foundation and its affiliated organizations. Daniel was not officially leading the review, yet his findings continued guiding it. Harold Benson remained involved as well. Together they followed one thread after another. What they discovered was neither simple nor accidental. The structure resembled a maze. Small consulting fees flowed through intermediary organizations. Administrative contracts moved between related entities. Donations occasionally passed through multiple channels before reaching their final destination. Each transaction appeared legitimate when viewed alone. That was the brilliance of it. No single document revealed the entire picture. The truth existed only when years of records were assembled side by side. One snowy afternoon, Daniel sat inside a conference room reviewing a fresh report prepared by forensic analysts. The room overlooked Queen's Quay where gray waves rolled beneath an overcast sky. Coda rested near the window. Several investigators studied the report in silence. Finally one of them looked up. We found additional connections. Daniel listened carefully. How many? More than we expected. The investigator slid several charts across the table. Multiple consulting companies appeared repeatedly throughout the network. Different names. Different ownership structures. Yet many shared overlapping directors, addresses, or financial relationships. The pattern extended back almost 8 years. Harold adjusted his glasses while studying the documents. This was not impulsive, he said quietly. Whoever designed this system understood governance, accounting, and public perception. Nobody disagreed. The deeper they looked, the more one name remained consistently close to critical decisions. Victor Langford. Not always directly. Never obviously. But always nearby. The realization unsettled everyone. Victor was admired throughout the province. He had spent years speaking on behalf of children, hospitals, and charitable causes. His public image inspired trust. That image now became the greatest obstacle to accepting what the evidence suggested. Daniel understood why. People preferred villains who looked like villains. Reality rarely cooperated. Several days later another breakthrough arrived. Investigators uncovered communications linking multiple financial decisions to directives that had bypassed ordinary review procedures. The approvals ultimately traced back to Victor's office. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why had Margaret accepted responsibility? The answer arrived unexpectedly. Through legal counsel, Margaret agreed to provide additional information. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Privately. Her statement changed everything. She admitted authorizing transactions. She admitted approving documentation she knew should have received greater scrutiny. But she insisted she had never created the system. She had inherited it. Maintained it. Protected it. At first because she believed the foundation depended upon stability. Later because she feared the consequences of exposing the truth. Daniel read her statement twice. Then a third time. Outside the window, snow drifted across the city. Inside, silence filled the room. Years earlier, Margaret had chosen loyalty over honesty. Now she was choosing honesty over fear. Daniel lowered the pages slowly. Across the room, Coda lifted his head. The German shepherd's dark eyes met his. For months the dog had carried a certainty nobody else understood. Now the pieces were finally beginning to align. And for the first time since the gala, the man standing closest to the spotlight no longer looked untouchable. March arrived with brighter mornings, but the city felt heavier than before. The final stages of the investigation unfolded behind closed doors while reporters gathered outside office buildings and foundation headquarters, searching for answers. Rumors traveled quickly. Facts moved more slowly. Daniel preferred facts. On a cold morning near the end of the month, he walked through a government building overlooking Toronto Harbor. Sunlight reflected across patches of melting snow. Coda moved quietly at his side. The German Shepherd was older now. A little slower than he had been years ago. Yet his focus remained unchanged. Inside a conference room, investigators, auditors, and legal representatives assembled around a long table. Stacks of documents filled several boxes along one wall. Digital displays showed years of financial records connected through lines, dates, and corporate registrations. The picture was finally complete. What had begun with a handful of unusual raffle tickets had revealed something much larger. The evidence showed a carefully constructed system operating for years beneath the appearance of generosity and public service. Funds had been redirected through layers of organizations and consulting arrangements. The amounts were rarely large enough to attract immediate scrutiny. That had been the strategy. Small adjustments repeated over time. Quiet enough to avoid attention. Significant enough to matter. Victor Langford arrived shortly before noon. He entered the room with the same calm presence that had made him a respected public figure for so many years. His suit was immaculate. His posture remained confident. For a moment, Daniel understood why so many people had trusted him. Victor looked like exactly the kind of person society wanted to believe in. The presentation lasted nearly 2 hours. Investigators explained the findings carefully. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontations. Just evidence. Dates. Records. Transfers. Approvals. Connections. Piece after piece. As the information accumulated, the confidence in Victor's expression slowly faded. When Margaret's statement was presented, silence settled over the room. She had described years of rationalizations. Promises that certain financial adjustments would eventually be corrected. Assurances that the Foundation's mission justified temporary compromises. Small decisions that became larger ones. Daniel listened quietly. What struck him most was not greed. It was how ordinary the beginning sounded. Rarely did people wake up intending to become villains. More often they drifted their one compromise at a time. By late afternoon, the process was complete. Formal actions followed. Public announcements were prepared. The truth would soon become known across Ontario. As officials gathered documents and closed laptops, one investigator paused near Daniel. "Funny thing," he said. "All of this started because a dog noticed something nobody else did." Several people glanced toward Coda. The German Shepherd remained calm beneath the attention. Daniel looked down at his partner and felt a faint smile touch his face. Throughout months of uncertainty, Coda had never changed his mind. He had never followed public opinion. He had never cared about status, titles, or reputation. He had simply noticed that something did not belong. Daniel crouched beside him and rested a hand gently against his neck. "Good catch, partner," he said softly. Coda looked up at him for a moment, then leaned slightly into the touch. Outside the conference room windows, sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the harbor. For the first time since that winter gala, the weight Daniel had been carrying began to lift. 6 months later, summer arrived gently along Toronto's waterfront. The snow was gone. The gray skies of winter had given way to clear mornings and sunlight dancing across Lake Ontario. For Daniel Mercer, the season marked the end of something important. After more than 3 decades in public service, his final day had come and gone without fanfare. There had been no grand speech. No television cameras. No ceremony designed to impress strangers. That suited him perfectly. Some chapters deserved quiet endings. Retirement settled over his life more comfortably than he expected. The early mornings belonged to him now. The pressure of investigations no longer followed him home. The constant ringing of phones had faded into memory. Yet one thing remained unchanged. Coda was still there. Older now. A little slower. A few more silver hairs appearing around his muzzle. But still beside him. Still watching. Still noticing. One bright Saturday morning, Daniel and Coda walked along a familiar route near a children's hospital overlooking the city. Warm sunlight reflected from the windows. Flower gardens lined the pathways. Families moved through the grounds carrying coffee cups, balloons, and quiet hopes. Laughter drifted through the air from a small playground near the rehabilitation wing. Daniel paused near a bench beneath a maple tree. Coda settled beside him. Together they watched children playing in the summer sunshine. Some ran across the grass. Others sat painting at outdoor tables. A young boy wearing a hospital bracelet tossed a tennis ball toward his sister while their parents watched nearby. Life. Ordinary life. The kind of thing many people overlooked until it nearly disappeared. Daniel felt the breeze move through the trees overhead. Months earlier, the foundation scandal had dominated headlines across Ontario. Investigations had concluded. Reforms had been implemented. New leadership had taken over. Public attention had moved on. That was the way of the world. People remembered dramatic endings. They rarely remembered how those endings began. Daniel glanced down at Coda. The German shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the children. Calm. Content. Peaceful. Daniel smiled faintly. Most reports credited investigators, auditors, and legal teams for uncovering the truth. They deserved credit. They had worked hard. But Daniel knew something the reports never fully captured. None of it would have happened without a dog who refused to ignore a detail that everyone else missed. A nurse walked past and paused when she recognized Coda. "Beautiful dog," she said warmly. Daniel nodded. "Thank you." She smiled before continuing down the path. The afternoon sun stretched longer shadows across the grounds. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Another answered. The sounds carried easily on the warm breeze. Daniel leaned back against the bench and allowed himself a moment of gratitude. Not for the investigation. Not for the headlines. Not even for the justice that followed. He was grateful for trust. For second chances. For the lesson he almost learned too late. Beside him, Coda rested his head gently against Daniel's knee. The gesture lasted only a moment. But it said everything. Most people remembered the men who helped expose the deception. Daniel remembered the dog who refused to look away. Some heroes bark. The rare ones simply notice.